I know there are things we keep in our hearts for so long that they begin to ache in silence. And when we finally choose to speak, it's not to cause a scene, it's simply to be free. My name is Robin Miller. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a quiet little town in Oregon, USA. This story began on the day I realized, without a single doubt, that my presence was no longer welcome in the very family I had built with everything I had. That day was the wedding of Sarah, my granddaughter, the daughter of Emily, my oldest child. The little girl I once held in my arms, soothed when she cried, and heard call me Grandma Robin with the sweetest voice. When Sarah announced her engagement, I was one of the first to know. I still remember that day clearly. I was washing dishes when the phone rang. Emily's voice was full of excitement. "Mom, I need your help planning the wedding. You know, your touch always makes everything perfect." I believed her. I helped choose the dress, took Sarah to the tailor, gave input on decorations, and even paid the remaining balance Emily was worried about. I never told anyone. I let them think everything came together like magic, not from the late nights I spent calculating every penny in my notebook. On Saturday morning, the wedding day, I got up early and put on the navy blue dress I had kept carefully for years. I went to Mrs. Patterson's salon, added a touch of lipstick, and carried the gift wrapped with a silver ribbon. I left home alone, heart fluttering, quietly reminding myself, today will be a happy day. I arrived early at the church, sitting in the front row on the bride's side, because I was the bride's grandmother, part of the bride's family. I believed I belonged there, not out of pride but out of love. People started arriving, laughing, taking photos. I sat still, smiling softly. No one approached me. No one spoke. But I told myself, they're just busy. Then, my younger son Daniel came over. He leaned down, voice low as if afraid someone might hear. "Mom, Emily asked me to tell you. Maybe it'd be better if you went home. That's her decision." The air froze. I heard every word clearly. Daniel couldn't look at me. I took a slow breath, clutched my purse, and stood up. He almost reached out, then pulled his hand back. I walked out of the church, unhurried. Some people glanced over, some whispered, but no one stopped me. Not Emily, not Sarah. I drove home in silence. No radio, no sound. The road felt twice as long. Every streetlight, every corner seemed to push me farther away from the life I thought I belonged to. When I got home, I took off the dress, folded it neatly, and set it on the sofa. I sat down, poured a cup of tea, and let it grow cold with time. That night, I didn't cry, not out of pride, but because the pain was already too deep for tears to find their way out. I looked up at an old picture. Emily at 9, dressed as an angel for her school play. I had stayed up all night sewing her wings while she slept soundly. She never knew. And in that moment, I understood what happened at the church wasn't a shock. It was the natural result of years spent being invisible. They only needed me when I was useful, when I paid bills, watched the kids, covered for their mistakes, smiled, and said, but when they wanted to look perfect, I became the wrinkle they needed to hide. They told me to rest, but what they really meant was to disappear. I had become a shadow in my own family. They only called when they needed a babysitter, a cosigner, a mother for appearances never out of love. And at that wedding, they erased even that last shadow of me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The clock's ticking seemed to whisper, "It's time, Robin. Give back the silence, the kindness, and the respect to yourself." And in that darkness, I knew it was time to turn the key on my own life. I spent the next 3 days in silence. No calls, no messages. I simply moved between the living room and kitchen, as if searching for something I had never actually lost. The hallway mirror reflected a face I barely recognized. Then, on Tuesday afternoon, something changed. Not a miracle, not a revelation, just a drawer. The second drawer of my desk, one I rarely opened. Inside were old papers, the house deed, and several credit cards I had opened to help my children. Emily had one. Her husband had one. Daniel occasionally used mine for temporary purchases expenses he would pay back, but never did. I opened the drawer, and there they were, all still there. Golden cards with my name on them. But the charges weren't mine. There were late fees, transfer slips, even a receipt for baby items for Emily's second child. Back then, she was battling postpartum depression. I bought everything, wrapped it, and gave it as a family gift, just so she wouldn't feel like a burden. I sat there, staring at the papers and plastic, as if looking at my life behind glass. Suddenly, everything became clear. The pieces lay right there. My kindness, my presence, my silence always available, always behind the scenes. I picked up the phone and called the card company. A gentle voice asked, "Ma'am, would you like to confirm canceling the secondary cards?" I answered, calm and steady. "Yes, I confirm." "Thank you." When I hung up, I felt something inside me shift back into place, as if I had finally put down a weight I was never meant to carry. Then, I reached for the green folder, holding the deed to the house where Emily lived with her husband and 2 children. The 2-story home I had let them use when Emily said rent was too expensive. "Just for a while, Mom, until we get back on our feet." The house was still under my one name. I still paid the property taxes because a mother is a mother, after all. But they never invited me for Sunday dinner there anymore. Every visit had to be scheduled in advance, and the air always felt strained, as if my presence was more of an inconvenience than a joy. I looked at the property deed, lightly touching the corner stained with a faint coffee ring, probably from some morning long ago, when I still dreamed of a family gathered under one roof. I opened my laptop, searched for a real estate agency downtown, and called. A friendly woman named Paula answered. I told her I had a house I wanted to sell. We set an appointment for the next day. When I hung up, I waited for guilt to surface, but it never came. There was no sting in my chest, no accusing voice in my head calling me ungrateful. Instead, I felt light, a steady kind of peace I hadn't known in years. It felt like someone who had been drowning for decades had finally touched the bottom and pushed up for air. That evening, I made a simple bowl of soup and sat on the porch, watching the streetlights glow. Every time a car passed, I wondered, do they know yet? And that, more than anything, made things clear. When you're no longer useful, the phone stops ringing. The messages stop coming. The visits stop. Absence becomes the echo of a presence that was once taken for granted. The next morning, I woke early, showered, dressed simply, and carried my folder to the real estate office. Paula greeted me with a smile and a cup of hot coffee. She listened, took notes, and asked questions. "How many rooms does the house have, Mrs. Robin?" 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an open living room, and kitchen. Out back, there's a small yard with an apple tree I planted when Sarah was born. She smiled. That must hold a lot of memories. "I do have them," I said, quietly, "but none that make me want to go back." We signed the preliminary paperwork. She said she'd send a photographer later that week. I shook her hand and left with a strange but empowering feeling, as if a breeze of freedom had just swept through my chest. I walked home. The sky was clear, cloudless, as if the universe itself was whispering, "You did the right thing." That afternoon, I took down an old hardcover notebook from the shelf, a journal I had never written in. On the first page, with a trembling but determined hand, I wrote, "Today, April 18th, I turned the key. And for the first time in years, I believe it's real." The truth is, no one disappears from a family photo overnight. It's not like turning off a light or erasing a name from a list. What they did to me at that wedding was only the tip of the iceberg. The part beneath had been building for years. I was always the kind of mother who swallowed her own tears to wipe away someone else's. When Emily was born, I was young and alone. Her father left before she turned 4, saying he needed to find himself, as if we were the reason he got lost. But I kept going. I took 2 jobs, days at a clinic, nights helping at a bakery. I woke before sunrise and came home with the smell of bread in my hair and an aching back. Emily slept when I left, and slept when I returned, and that broke my heart. I started leaving little notes. Every morning before work, I'd write a few lines and stick them on the fridge. "Good morning, my little flower," or "Mom loves you more than pudding." When Emily learned to read, she began writing back. One morning, I found a note on the bathroom mirror. "Mom, your hair is messy, but you're still beautiful." I still have that note today, tucked inside a book no one ever opens. Time passed. Emily grew up, exams, friends, boyfriends, and I was always there, steady like a pillar, even when I felt ready to collapse. I went to her first job interview, clapped at her graduation, helped prepare her wedding, all without asking for anything, except maybe a glance, an acknowledgement, a seat at the table. When Emily got pregnant for the first time, she called me in tears. Her husband didn't have steady work. The apartment was small, and fear hung over her. I dropped everything to take care of her. I cooked soup, did laundry, cleaned, slept on an air mattress in the living room just so she wouldn't feel alone through the long, nauseous nights. When the baby was born, I was the one who cared for it in those early months. Emily was still weak, and the baby's father barely held the child at all. I learned to bathe the baby in warm water, sang lullabies my own mother used to sing to me. And yet, slowly, I began to disappear. First, they stopped mentioning me in photo captions. Then came the polite invitations, always with time limits. "Mom, come after 5 p.m. It'll be less crowded." Then the warnings not to post photos. "It's just that Sarah's page has a certain aesthetic, you understand." No, I didn't, but I nodded anyway. I agreed when they told me not to introduce myself as the kid's grandma at school. It just confuses people. I agreed when they said I didn't need to appear in birthday videos because we already have enough people. I agreed when they said my way of talking was too old-fashioned, that it embarrassed the kids. And every time I agreed, another part of me was trimmed away, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. My 2 sons, Daniel and Mark, became just like them. Daniel was always the peacemaker, polite, avoiding conflict. Whenever I felt hurt, he'd say, "Don't take it to heart, Mom. Emily's just difficult. What matters is we still love you." More distant. He married a woman who once said outright during a Christmas dinner, "Your mom is a bit old-fashioned. We should really associate with people on our level." He said nothing, just bowed his head and passed the salt shaker. That night, I left early, pretending I had a headache. When I got home, I took off my shoes, looked at my feet with the chipped nail polish, and wondered, am I just something unpleasant to look at now? From then on, I started dressing more plainly, dyed my hair a soft brown, and stopped wearing my bright earrings. I slowly shrank smaller, quieter until I was almost invisible. But I still loved them, because they always said, "Mom, it's all for your own good." And I believed them. I believed until the day I wore that navy blue dress and was asked to leave the very story of my own life. That week, after selling the house and canceling the cards, I opened an old box on top of the wardrobe. Inside were memories no one remembered anymore. Childish drawings, school certificates, photos from the 1990s. One brown envelope caught my eye. Inside was Emily's first wedding invitation, a simple civil ceremony, arranged in a hurry. In her handwriting, "Mom, thank you for everything. Without you, I wouldn't have had the courage." I read it aloud, then folded it carefully and put it back, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder that once she had seen me. And perhaps that's what hurt the most, knowing that once I was everything, and now I wasn't even a guest. But that emptiness would not consume me, because now I understood. This story wasn't my fault. What they did was their choice. How I moved forward, that was mine. Going back to that house felt like stepping into a dusty mirror. Everything was still there, but nothing reflected who I used to be. It was a gloomy Thursday when the realtor scheduled the visit. Paula had told me the photographer preferred to shoot in natural light. "If you could open the windows before he arrives, that would be great," she'd said on the phone. I carried the key ring and walked slowly. The gate was rustier than I remembered. I pushed gently, hearing the familiar creak, the sound I'd mentioned countless times needed. Oiling, but no one ever cared. The garden was barren. The flowers I once planted, even the azalea pot Emily had given me for Mother's Day, were dried and dead. The wooden bench where I used to sit and hold my grandchildren was covered with a dirty tarp, as if someone wanted to hide time or hide me. On the door still hung the Christmas wreath I'd put up the last time I was invited 3 years ago. I thought they would have replaced it by now, but maybe they forgot, or simply didn't have the time or the reason to look back. I stepped inside. The house smelled of coldness and neglect. Nothing was out of place, yet everything felt misplaced. The pillows I had sewn by hand still sat on the sofa, but turned backward, hiding the embroidery stitched by my own fingers. I brushed the dust off the shelf, picked up a framed photo. A family portrait: Emily, her husband, the kids, but not me. Not even a shadow behind them. As if someone had cut me out of the picture with invisible scissors. I walked upstairs slowly. Each step creaked with a sound I knew too well. How many times had I climbed those stairs, arms full of toys, or a sleeping child, or a basket of clean laundry no one asked for. In Sarah's room, the same poster from an old TV show was still on the wall. The same room where years ago, when she was 8, she'd asked me to help her write a school essay titled "The Most Important Woman in My Life." She wrote my name and got the highest grade. Emily wasn't happy. She said it exposed our family structure. I stayed silent, as always. In the hallway, I opened the closet where I used to keep a few clothes for nights I stayed over. Empty. Only one lonely hanger remained. I stared at that emptiness with a bitter calm. I had been erased from this place long ago. I just hadn't realized it. In the bathroom, I saw a bottle of perfume, the one I had bought for Emily years earlier, when she said she couldn't waste money on frivolous things. It had been my way of saying, "I see you." The bottle was half empty now, and perhaps even the scent was gone. I returned to the living room and sat on the sofa for a few minutes, just to breathe. Then it became clear this house had never really been mine. I paid for it, I gave it, I carried it, but I had never truly lived in it. I was only a guest, lodging in my own generosity. I looked around and placed my hand on the dining table. Beneath it were faint crayon marks drawn by Lucas, the youngest. One afternoon during lunch, he had secretly sketched a picture: a son, a house, 4 people. I asked, "Who's this?" He answered, "Dad, Mom, Sarah, and me." I asked again, "What about Grandma?" He said, "No room left." I laughed at the time, but today, I understood. The doorbell rang. It was the photographer, a polite young man with a camera around his neck, looking slightly rushed. He greeted me and got to work. I quietly followed, opening windows, adjusting curtains, pretending my heart wasn't aching. When he said, "This house is beautiful. It has such a peaceful energy," I almost replied, "It used to," but I only smiled. When he finished, thanked me, and left, I closed each window one by one, as if closing a chapter of my life. Before leaving, I stopped by the kitchen door. On the wall still hung a small decorative tile I had placed there the first month Emily moved in. On it was carved the phrase, "Home is where the heart rests." I gently removed it, slipped it into my purse, locked the door, stepped back a few paces, and looked one last time. I didn't cry. I didn't say goodbye, because to me, that door had closed long ago. On the sidewalk, I stood waiting for Paula's car, the realtor who had promised to drive me to the notary office. When she arrived, she smiled and asked, "Doing okay, Mrs. Miller?" I replied, "I'm fine," she said. "This is a good house. It'll probably sell fast." I nodded. "I hope so." She looked at me softly. "Are you sure about this?" I took a deep breath. "Yes. For the first time in my life, I'm truly sure." We got in the car. The road and the house slowly faded behind us, along with all the years I had spent trying to represent a family that no longer felt like mine. In that moment, I realized selling the house wasn't about selling bricks or breaking from the past. It was about reclaiming the boundaries I had once allowed others to erase. It was about rewriting myself, finally choosing me. 3 days after the photo session, they came. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had just finished baking an apple pie from my mother's old recipe, one made by instinct, by memory. I was dusting powdered sugar on top when the doorbell rang. I froze. No one ever rang my doorbell without warning. My few friends always called first. Neighbors texted. And family, well, they hadn't visited in a long time. I peeked through the window and saw Emily and Daniel standing at the gate. Emily held a paper bag. Daniel had his arms crossed, looking as if he'd been dragged there. Their presence felt heavy, not loving. For a second, I thought about not opening the door. But something inside me whispered, "Go." I walked slowly down the steps, opened the gate gently, and said nothing. They didn't smile. They exchanged glances, as if deciding who would speak first. Emily began, "Hi, Mom." I nodded. "Can we come in?" I motioned toward the door. "Come in." No greeting hugs, no warmth more like welcoming delivery people than my own children. They sat on the sofa. Emily placed the bag on the table. "I brought your favorite pastries from that shop on Main Street, remember?" I remembered, but said nothing. She glanced around, like a stranger visiting a place that once belonged to her. She fidgeted, adjusting her posture again and again. Daniel stared at his phone, not daring to look up. Finally, Emily spoke. We know about the house and the cards." I stayed silent. She continued, lowering her voice. "I know you're angry. Photos, guests, everything." I said softly, but firmly, "Because you didn't want me in the pictures." Emily froze, trying to deny it, but couldn't find the words. "It wasn't personal, Mom." I gave a faint smile, just personal enough to erase me from the ceremony. Daniel jumped in. "Mom, we just wanted to avoid tension. It wasn't meant badly. Emily asked me to talk to you. I didn't want to, but—" I interrupted, not angrily, just truthfully. The room fell silent. Emily lowered her head, pulled a tissue from her bag, pretending to wipe her face really just to hide her shame-filled eyes. She said quietly, "I know you're hurt, and you're right to be. But selling the house and canceling the cards, that really hurt us." "Hurt you?" I repeated slowly. She nodded. "We feel like we lost something." I took a deep breath, stood up, walked into the kitchen, and returned with 2 cups of coffee. I placed them in front of them and said, "Lost your place, Emily? Losing your place is working 30 years with an aching back, yet still carrying your children because they couldn't afford childcare. Losing your place is being called mom only when someone needs your signature. True loss of place is sitting in the front row at your own granddaughter's wedding, the one you helped raise, and being asked to leave. That's losing your place." Emily's chin trembled. Daniel stared at the floor. "We were wrong," Emily whispered. I nodded. "Yes, and not just this time." Emily reached out halfway, then stopped. "You know I love you, Mom," she said softly. I looked her straight in the eyes. "Love isn't said, it's shown." She had no answer. "I just want to understand. Why now?" she asked. "Because now I finally understand," I said. Waiting to be valued by people who only see me as useful is a loop that never ends. And getting older doesn't mean being discarded. I've accepted too much in the name of love, but love should never mean abandoning yourself. Emily began to cry. I didn't. "Mom, do you want us to leave?" "No." She looked up, eyes glimmering with a trace of hope. "I want you to stay," I said. "But don't expect things to go back to how they were, because that version of how they were is what broke me." The room fell silent again. Daniel took a sip of coffee. Emily stared at the floor. I went on. "You came because you lost convenience, not because you found remorse. I understand that, and I don't blame you, but this time, I choose myself." They sat for a few more minutes before standing up. "Mom, can we come back another day? If it's to talk person to person, not playing roles, then yes." Emily nodded. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, and the two of them left. I locked the gate, went back inside, cut a slice of pie, and ate. For the first time in many years, it tasted sweet again. There are memories we recall as if they happened yesterday, but they belong to decades past, to a life we once wore like a dress that no longer fits. After Emily and Daniel's visit, I stayed silent for days. Not because I was sad, but because I was digesting. I needed to process everything, the words spoken, the ones left unsaid, the looks, the pauses. Because sometimes, what hurts the most are the things never voiced. One gray morning in Portland, I decided to clean the small storage room in the back, the place where I kept things I couldn't bear to throw away. A kind of time capsule, filled with memories of me, of them, of us. Inside were boxes of old toys, school notebooks, VHS tapes, and a few children's clothes. On the shelf's corner sat a cardboard box tied with a red ribbon. Inside it was the woman I used to be. The dresses I had sewn in my 20s, when I dreamed of becoming a designer, rough linen fabric-covered buttons, hand-embroidered collars. I made them, wore them, walked around the living room as if on a runway until Emily was born. After that, the sewing machine became a survival tool, stitching diapers, curtains, and bed sheets. Dreams turned into frugality. In another box, I found old scrapbook pages from magazines, pictures of places I once dreamed of visiting. Venice, Aspen, and a little wooden cabin in the Oregon woods. I had never gone anywhere. There was always a reason. A doctor's appointment, a tuition payment, a birthday gift. I remembered the night I canceled a beach trip because Emily caught a cold. She was already an adult, then married, with her own home. But she called, saying she didn't feel well. I canceled my trip, made soup, went to her house, stayed 2 days, did laundry, looked after the baby, cleaned the fridge. She recovered. I came home with a fever. I remembered when Daniel lost his job and came asking for help. I gave him all the money I had saved to repair my plumbing. I took cold showers for 3 months while he paid off his car and never mentioned it again. And Mark, my youngest, who was chosen for a 2-month exchange program in Canada, I sold all the jewelry from my youth to cover the costs. I never told him. I thought he was too young to understand the value. Now I know he should have been old enough to appreciate it. I could sit for hours in that endless cycle. But no one ever talks about the cost of it. The cost of staying up so your children can sleep soundly. Of saying, it's okay, when what you really want to say is, help me. Of being happy for someone else's light while living forever in the shadows. I once thought that was love, and it was, but it was also the abandonment of myself. Little by little, I faded away. I stopped painting my nails, stopped wearing perfume, stopped going to lunch with friends, stopped dancing, stopped buying books, stopped watching the movies I loved because they didn't like them, until I realized my life had shrunk to just a few steps. From the kitchen to the bedroom, from the closet to the grandchildren's room. I became a pillar, a wall, a bridge between other people's needs. And no one hugs a bridge. No one asks if the wall has cracks, they only complain when it does. My grandchildren stopped visiting after they turned 10. They said my house was too far, yet the mall was somehow close. I understood. They wanted my cooking, not my company. I had given them everything, they only accepted fragments. I closed the scrapbook box, took one dress, and put it on. Looking in the mirror, it still fit, and I smiled. Not out of pride, but because I had met myself again, the woman I thought I'd lost in the folds of silence. I opened the window, letting the light pour in. The smell of old wood, stored fabric, and hope brushed against my skin. And I made myself a promise. I will wear this dress, even if it's just to drink coffee on the porch, even if it's just to sit on the sofa and feel that I belong to myself again. Later that afternoon, I wrote in my journal, how many times have I dimmed myself so they could shine? Countless times. But today, I want to light my own flame. Even if it's small, it's mine. Then I closed the notebook tightly. I may have been lost along the way, but now I am coming home. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm, and that, for me, was something new. After decades of having my sleep tied to a baby's cry or someone else's schedule, waking up naturally felt like taking my first breath above water. I sat up slowly, slipped on my worn house slippers, walked to the kitchen, and set the kettle on the gas stove. As the water boiled, I opened the window. The sky was clear blue, the air fresh, and for the first time in so many years, I wasn't in a hurry to go anywhere. At 68, I allowed myself to begin again, starting with the smallest things. I began with the morning. I put away the plain white tablecloth and replaced it with a bright red one covered in big flowers. The one I had bought years ago, but tucked away because it was too loud. Now, that loudness was exactly what I wanted. Color. Life. I brewed my coffee slowly. I cut 2 slices of cake, one for me, and the other, also for me. My whole life, I'd always cooked for 2, even while living alone. A habit of someone who once kept waiting for somebody to come home. But now, I was complete with just myself. After finishing my coffee, I went into the bedroom and opened my closet. Every hanger was perfectly aligned, and the clothes were all in neutral tones, too pale, too invisible. I opened the box in the small room, the one where I'd kept the linen dress with the hand-embroidered collar that I'd found while cleaning out the previous chapter of my life. I took it out, put it on, looked in the mirror, and smiled. It still fit, but more than that, it still told a story about me. That afternoon, I walked to a small park near my home in Oregon, carrying an old novel with yellowed pages. I sat on a bench under a tree, read a few pages, then stopped, not because I was tired, but because nearby, a group of older women were chatting by the fountain. They were laughing loudly, talking about recipes, children, TV shows, and politics. One wore a colorful headband, another had on bright pink lipstick. They looked confident, at ease in their own skin. I stepped closer and asked hesitantly, "Excuse me? May I sit with you?" They looked at me and smiled as if greeting an old friend. "Of course, honey, come sit down." The one who spoke was named Zulaid, 74 years old, with 3 grandchildren and a little dog named Toby. Before long, I had joined their conversation. They told stories, asked about mine. I answered just enough, not hiding, not oversharing, because some things are meant to be spoken only when you know who's listening. Zulaid told me about a writing class for older women held every Wednesday at the local library in Portland. "You should come," she said. "When you write down what you've lived, it's like stitching your soul back together." The class was small, a round table, plastic chairs, a pot of hot tea, butter cookies, and colorful notebooks. The instructor was a young woman named Camila, who gave us a prompt: write a letter to the woman you were at 30. My hands trembled, but my heart was steady. When it came time to share, Camila said anyone who wanted could read aloud. I raised my hand, stood up, and read, "Dear Robin, I know you're tired, ignored, burdened, and forgotten. But don't give up, because one day you'll find yourself again. You'll remember what you used to love. You'll dance alone in your living room. You'll wear lipstick for no one but yourself. You'll stop begging for invitations to lunch. And you'll understand that peace has no price and that presence never needs permission. You are not just someone's mother. You are yourself, and you will be whole again." When I finished, the room fell silent, then filled with gentle applause. Not the loud kind, but the kind that comes from respect, from recognition. As we left, Camila hugged me and said, "Thank you for sharing. Your voice has strength." I went home with tears in my eyes, but they were tears of release. That night, I went through my clothes, the ones that no longer felt like me. Colorless pants, shapeless tops, shoes that hurt my feet. I folded them, packed them up for donation, and made room for myself. The next morning, I painted my nails a deep red, elegant, and bold. I remembered Emily once saying, "That color's too much." And in my mind, I answered, "Maybe for you, but for me, it's memory." I bought a pot of white daisies and placed it on the porch. I started morning walks, learning to say no more to others, and yes more to myself. I changed my phone ringtone to a gentle guitar melody and turned off all the notifications from groups that only existed to show off lives I was no longer part of. One afternoon, I went to have a new ID photo taken, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see myself again, clearly, presently, completely. Bit by bit, I stopped merely existing and began living slowly, intentionally, peacefully. That Friday evening, I opened my journal again. Today, I sat under the sun and let it touch my skin. No guilt, no to-do list, no obligations. I still exist, and now I truly belong to myself. I closed the notebook and watered the daisies. It was a gentle Monday afternoon. Time seemed to pause. I stood on the porch, listening to the soft strumming of guitar music, when I heard the gate creak. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The footsteps said it all, not the mailman, not a neighbor. I walked to the window, and there they were. Emily, holding a bouquet, her eyes red. Next to her, her husband, the son-in-law, who had spent years pretending to be polite, but never once truly respected me, holding a gift bag. And behind them stood Sarah, my granddaughter, the bride, the one who had told me to leave the wedding where I should have been invited to dance. For a moment, time stopped. The 3 of them stood there like figures in a carefully posed photograph. I touched the latch, opened the door, stepped forward, saying nothing. Emily approached. Mom, do you have a minute? I nodded, not fully opening the door, but not closing it either. Mom, can we come in? Yes. They stepped inside. The house suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls themselves knew something had cracked, as if memories still lingered somewhere on the sofa. They sat down. Emily placed the bouquet on the table lilies, my favorite. But now, they were just flowers. We came to talk, Mom. To really talk? I nodded. Emily took a deep breath. We were wrong, Mom. Not just about the wedding, about everything. You've always been our roots, our foundation, and we treated you like a burden, like the leftover piece. Sarah moved closer. Grandma, I was ungrateful. I cared too much about appearances, about etiquette, about perfect pictures, and forgot what truly mattered. Her voice trembled. You were always my role model. But I let others convince me it'd be better if you didn't come. I thought it wouldn't matter, but it did to me. You taught us how to care, how to endure, how to be strong. But we used your strength as an excuse to never take care of you. My son-in-law pulled a small package from his bag. We brought back a few things you left behind, a book and a picture frame. I took them. It was my mother's recipe notebook. When I opened it, the pages were still stained with oil, the writing in faded pencil. One messy line caught my eye. Grandma's cake, written in Emily's childhood handwriting. I turned a few more pages and stayed silent. Then Emily spoke again. We didn't come to ask for things to go back the way they were. We just came to apologize. Sarah knelt beside me. Grandma, can I hug you? I hesitated, then opened my arms. She wrapped herself around me tightly. For a moment, time moved backward before the hurt, before the distance. It was a hug without promises, but full of memory. Emily stood as well. Mom, if someday you want to have lunch with us again, our door is always open. But if you don't, I'll understand. I just needed to say, I see you now. I nodded. And now, I see myself too. They stood up. Can we come again, Mom? You can, but don't bring flowers, don't bring gifts, just bring the truth. Emily smiled, her eyes a mix of shame and gratitude. I understand. They walked out. Before leaving, Sarah turned back and asked softly, Grandma, can I post a picture of us together someday? I smiled but didn't answer because now the value of being in the picture no longer depended on the caption. I closed the gate, went back inside, placed the notebook on the shelf, and put the bouquet into a simple glass vase. Then I wrote in my journal, Today, they brought me flowers, but the one who bloomed was me. Many people think freedom is music, fireworks, or parties. For me, it arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon with the whistle of the kettle, signaling that the tea was ready. Chamomile tea, simple, like the way I've learned to love. I held the cup with both hands, stepped onto the porch, and sat in my mother's old wicker chair, the one that creaked every time she told me stories back when we lived in Seattle. And there, in the gentle breeze brushing past the curtains, I realized I was at peace. No guilt, no rush, no one expecting me to do anything that wasn't mine to carry. My days now moved to a different rhythm. I woke early, not out of obligation, but out of choice. I took long showers, applied lotion slowly, chose clothes that made me feel beautiful, not invisible. I wore my big earrings again, the ones that chimed softly when I turned my head. I loved that sound, it whispered. I'm still here. My meals became colorful again. No more leftovers. No more hurried bites from a life lived for others. I bought new spices, mint, turmeric, fresh basil. I discovered I liked avocado with lemon, and that a warm slice of cornbread in the afternoon could feel like a hug you get to repeat. Every morning, I walked around the park. I befriended 3 women from the sewing circle: Yolanda, who always shared stories about her children; Nora, who painted watercolors to sell; and Ivy, who kept inviting me to join the monthly swap club, where they traded clothes, books, plants, and sometimes kindness. I went to the library every Wednesday, the same writing class. I wrote short stories, memories, and scattered thoughts. One day, Camila, the instructor, called me aside and said, "Robin, have you ever thought about publishing?" I laughed. "Publishing what, dear?" "What you write. The way you see the world. There's strength in it. And there are people who need to read it to understand that it's never too late." Her words stayed in my mind. The following week, I opened my old computer and typed the first line: "Things I've learned after 60." And I began to write. One of the first lines: "You don't need to shout to be heard sometimes. True healing is found in silence." Then another: "Not every absence is a loss. Sometimes it's the space we need to grow." And another: "Peace is never loud. But once it arrives, no one wants to leave it." While writing, I felt alive, not because someone remembered me, but because I remembered myself. I watered my plants every day and talked to them, and in each drop soaking into the soil, I could feel myself growing again. The fern in my living room I named Martha, and the cactus by the window Theo. They spoke to me through silence, and I understood. I started listening to music again. Really listening. I found my old records, the songs that once lulled me to sleep, back when radios ran on batteries. Sometimes I danced alone, in the living room, spinning slowly, eyes closed, feeling the floor beneath my feet. Not because someone invited me, but because I invited myself. One day, I went to the grocery store and bought flowers. I smiled. For no one. It's Wednesday, and I like having flowers on Wednesdays. She smiled back, the kind of smile from someone who understands more than what's said. Sometimes Emily would text brief, polite messages: "Good morning, Mom," or "Sarah says hi." I no longer believed in promises, but I also didn't close myself off to kindness. I replied when I wanted to, and when I didn't, I stayed silent. And that was freedom. Daniel called once. He said he'd dreamed of me, sitting by a lake, smiling. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm at peace, sweetheart." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's good, Mom. You deserve it." When I hung up, my throat tightened, not from sadness, but from the ache of all the things that never were, yet were finally beginning to bloom. As for Mark, he didn't show up, didn't write, and I didn't reach out. That, too, was a kind of healing. One afternoon, I sat on the porch of my little house in Oregon, notebook on my lap, and wrote a letter to myself. "Dear Robin, the woman you've become makes me proud. You no longer shout, no longer overreact, but you no longer bow your head either. You no longer beg for a place, no longer shrink to fit in. You've relearned how to smile, how to care for yourself, how to choose your own joy, and that is victory." I closed the notebook, took a sip of tea, and looked at my reflection in the window, whole, alone but not lonely, quiet but not vanished, peaceful but not forgotten by myself. The suitcase had been ready since the night before. Not big, just enough for a light dress, soft sandals, a blue sweater, and the red-covered journal where I wrote my thoughts. I added a small photo, the only one of me with my 3 children when they were little, sitting in the backyard, smiling innocently, unaware of what the future would hold. I zipped it up, took a deep breath, I was going on a trip, not to escape, not on impulse, just as a symbol, a step for myself. After so many years of standing still, holding up the world for others, it was finally time for me to see the world through my own eyes. Even if it was just a nearby town, even if it was only for 3 days. I chose a small inn on a hill, simple wooden cabins, the scent of pine in the air, quiet except for the wind and birdsong. I called to book a room. The receptionist asked, "Are you coming to celebrate a birthday or an anniversary?" I laughed. "No, I'm coming to celebrate freedom." I took the bus after breakfast. Sitting by the window, I watched the winding road unfold, like an old film reel, trees passing by, power poles lined in a row, the town slowly fading in the rearview mirror. And there, in that narrow seat, I realized I had never gone anywhere alone, never by choice. But this time, I was the companion I most wanted to have. I arrived in the afternoon. The innkeeper, Mrs. Azira, a kind woman, greeted me with a cup of lemongrass tea and cornbread. "Are you here to rest, dear?" "No, I'm here to remember." "Remember what?" "Myself." She simply smiled. The room. The room. I was small but cozy, a hammock on the porch, a cushioned chair by the window. I set down my suitcase, took off my shoes, and stepped barefoot onto the wooden floor, listening to the familiar creak. I stood still, taking in the sounds of nature, birds, wind, the slow rhythm of time. That first night, I wrote in my journal, "I don't remember my old life. I only remember myself in that life. And here, I exist again." On the second day, I woke to birdsong. I drank coffee leisurely. I strolled through the small market, bought a colorful beaded necklace and a loaf of handmade bread. I sat atop the highest hill, looking down at the valley, tiny rooftops, rows of trees, a river winding through the meadow. I closed my eyes and let the wind embrace me. For the first time, I felt the world's arms open to me. I thought back to that afternoon when I was asked to leave my granddaughter's wedding, how the silence in the car had been heavier than any scream. But here, on this hilltop, I understood. They hadn't pushed me away. They had simply pushed me back toward myself. That night, I had vegetable soup cooked over a wood stove. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, and looked up at the starry sky. I didn't ask for anything. I just said, "Thank you. Thank you for finally letting me understand that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's survival." On the last day, I found a small note slipped under my door. "It was a joy having you here. Please come back, not just here, but back to yourself." I smiled, packed my things gently. On the bus ride home, I unfolded old notes tucked inside my journal. One was a piece of paper in Emily's childish handwriting. "Mom, you're my favorite star." And I understood time can change how people see you, but it can never erase who you were. I returned home while it was still light. Everything was just as before, except me. On the porch, the pot of white daisies was still blooming. I walked inside, turned on the warm yellow light, took off my shoes, and stood before the hallway mirror. Looking at myself from head to toe, I didn't see old. I didn't see weak. I saw whole. I brewed tea, sat down, notebook on my lap, and wrote, "My children haven't lost me. They just stopped seeing me. But I've found myself again, and that is enough." I closed the notebook. On the shelf, I placed the old family photo beside a new one. To me on the hilltop, smiling peacefully, wearing the colorful necklace. The photo had been taken by a stranger who'd happened to pass by and offered to help. I placed the two side by side because now, my story had come full circle. That night, before sleeping, I turned off the light and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Robin, for not abandoning me." And I slept with no longing, no fear, no need for approval. because in the end, I had chosen myself. This story is fiction, inspired by true experiences, with names and locations changed to protect privacy. Yet in every line, we can see the reflection of many mothers, women who have given so much of themselves just to be loved, seen, and belong. Robin chose silence for many years, until she realized that silence itself is an answer. But should we stay silent forever? Or is it time to speak up for our worth? Sometimes awakening doesn't come from anger, but from the peace of learning to love ourselves the way God has always loved us, wholly, patiently, and with grace. If you've ever felt the same, leave a comment and share your story. And don't forget to watch the 2 suggested videos at the end. You might just find faith and strength for your own journey.